Before I start this video, I just want to quickly take this time to say thank you to every single one of you who sent lovely messages during my time away. The last few weeks have been very difficult, but your kind words really meant a lot, and I really appreciate every single message you guys sent. So again, thank you very much, and thank you also for your understanding during the time I've been away. Now let's get into today's video. At the end of 2000, the Super Touring era had officially come to an end in the BTCC thanks to a rise in development costs, which in turn saw many manufacturers pulling the plug on their programs, with Audi and Peugeot pulling out at the end of 1998, whilst Nissan, Volvo and Renault would join them at the end of 99. Then, at the end of 2000, before the introduction of the BTC Touring regulations the following year, Ford and Honda would also pull out of the championship, leaving just one manufacturer left to continue on into the new era. That same manufacturer would go on to dominate the championship for the next few years, which in turn would see them become one of the most recognisable brands in the series' history. This is the story of Vauxhall's dominance in the early 2000s. The story of Vauxhall in the BTCC begins all the way back in 1989, when the British manufacturer would make its debut as a works team, being ran by Dave Cook Racing, who had ran a few Vauxhall Novas in the past when the series was known as the British Saloon Car Championship. Using an Astra GTE that would be piloted by Volvo dealer John Clellan, yes that is his day job, and also Jeremy Rosita and Louise Aitken-Walker, the team would compete in the Class C category, as this was during a time when the BTCC was still running the confusing class system, something I briefly touched on in an early video of mine. And it was because of this that the team were able to challenge for the overall title, and thanks to taking 11 out of 13 wins in his class, combined with being more consistent than his rivals in Class A and Class B, Clellan would come through to take his and Vauxhall's first ever title, beating the Class B BMW of James Weaver by just 1 point, with another 21 points separating Clellan from the Class A Ford Sierra of Andy Rouse. Whilst this was a great moment for Vauxhall, it wasn't so much for Clellan, as in an interview he did for the ITV programme Touring Car Legends a few decades later, he admitted he didn't feel satisfied about his title win due to the nature of how the BTCC was structured back then. Luckily for Clellan, change wouldn't come too far away, as once the 1989 season drew to a close, the BTCC was slowly phasing out the class system, with the series reducing it to just 2 classes in 1990 before becoming a 1-class series in 1991. 1990 would see the team compete in the Class B category, which used a set of regulations that would form the basis for the Super Touring regulations that would be used from the start of the 1991 season. The team as a result would switch from the Astra GTE to a Cavalier, with John Clellan again being the only full-time driver, whilst the second seat was being shared by various drivers from the 5th meeting of the championship, with one of these drivers being future Formula 1 driver David Coulthard. But sadly for John, he was unable to retain his title, as only 4 class wins during the year would see him finish only 5th in the standings, not even winning the Class B title and being 79 points behind eventual champion and Class A runner Rob Gravitt. 1991 would see a change in fortune, as thanks to the series becoming a 1-class championship, the team were able to be regular frontrunners, with the team taking their first ever overall win at Thruxton, courtesy of John Clellan, who would lead home a Vauxhall 1-2 ahead of his new teammate that year, Jeff Allen. John would pick up 2 more wins that year at Alton Park and the second visit to the Grand Prix layout of Donington, but would ultimately miss out on the title to the Victory Motorsport BMW of Will Hoy, who would beat Clellan in the end by 23 points and would become the first ever champion of the 1-class era. 1992 would see Clellan and Hoy fight for the title again, but they will be joined by Tim Harvey, who had taken Hoy's place at BMW as a result of Will moving over to Toyota. John and Will would fight each other in the first half of the season, but a late charge from Harvey in the second half of the season, which saw him take 5 consecutive wins, would put him right in the fight heading into the finale at Silverstone. John had the advantage heading into the weekend, and it was all initially going well for him, as he was ahead of Tim from the majority of the race and was on course to win his second BTCC title. But when Tim's teammate Steve Soper came into the picture, having charged his way through the field following a first lap collision which damaged his rear end, he would end up making John's race a living hell, as after overtaking John into Vauxhall, which allowed Harvey to also get through and also resulted in John sticking his middle finger up, John, after Tim would get by on Soper, would lunge it down the inside of Steve into Brooklands, leaving John on 2 wheels and shoving Steve onto the grass, resulting in Steve crashing into the side of John into Lovefield and taking each other out of the race. This resulted in John controversially losing the title to Tim by just 7 points, with Will Hoy also being able to leapfrog John into second, and would lead to John to berate Steve in a post-race interview.
It takes me straight into barriers. I mean, what are we doing here? Is this stock car racing or is this motorsport? He might get away with that in Germany where he might be Mr. Superstar, but this is clean. The man's an animal.
Whilst the moment itself would put the BTCC on the map worldwide, it didn't help to raise John's mood, who felt that he was well and truly robbed that day, and the next 2 years wouldn't help lift his mood either. 1993 and 1994 would see Vauxhall pretty much in the wilderness, as whilst they would still take victories throughout those 2 years, they were nowhere near challenging for the title, with BMW, who were ran by Team Schnitzer, completely dominating the championship in 1993 with Jochen Winkelhock, whilst the debuting Alfa Romeo team, with their controversial aerodynamic parts, would dominate the championship in 1994 with Gabriele Tarquini. It was in that particular year that Vauxhall would change allegiances, as at the end of 1993 they would end up splitting with Dave Cook Racing and would hand the running of the programme to Ray Mallock Limited, and it would be this partnership that would catapult the team in 1995. Thanks to a change in the rules, which allowed the teams to run aerodynamic parts brought about by a loophole that Alfa Romeo exploited the previous year, Vauxhall came out the gates with a very competitive car, with John Clellan being confident of the team's chances following some private testing with the car. Despite stern competition from Volvo and Renault throughout the year, with Rickard Rydell and Alain Menu leading their charges respectively, a run of 4 straight wins in the middle part of the season swung the championship in Clellan's favour, and thanks to another win at Brands Hatch Indy, along with a consistent run of podiums, it allowed Clellan to wrap up his second title at the penultimate meeting at Alton Park, winning the championship come season's end by 43 points ahead of Menu. After arguably being robbed in '92, Clellan finally got his redemption 3 years later, and finally felt satisfaction in winning the championship, having not felt the same way in '89 due to the format the series had ran back then. But sadly for Clellan, 95 would be as high as it would get, as for the rest of his career, he would not come close to challenging for a championship again. 1996 would see the team switch from the Cavalier to its replacement the Vectra, and it's safe to say that the switch wiped away the performance they had the previous year, as along with the debuting Audi team, which would go on to dominate the championship that year with Frank Biela, thanks to their revolutionary 4-wheel drive system, the team would struggle to mingle with the likes of Volvo, Renault and BMW, with the latter entering what would turn out to be their final year in the series. The team's only high point of the year would come at Snetterton, where in race 1, the team would grab its first ever victory with the Vectra, although it wouldn't come courtesy of John Clellan, as instead, his younger teammate James Thompson, who had joined the team the previous year, would instead take the team's only victory that year, with Clellan making it a double podium for the team, only being denied by Biela to make it a Vauxhall 1-2. John would not achieve a victory that year, and the team's drop-off in performance would show in the championship, as both Clellan and Thompson would finish the year in a disappointing 8th and 10th respectively, with Clellan finishing 11 points behind the debuting John Bincliffe, who underperformed in his Audi. 1997 would see Vauxhall split with Ray Mallock Limited as a result of them taking on the Nissan contract and form a new partnership with 888 Racing, a team you might be familiar with if you are fans of the Australian Supercars Championship. Despite this switch though, the manufacturer would end up having an even worse season than 96, with neither Cleland or Warwick, who replaced the Honda-bound James Thompson, grabbing a win or podium that season, with the highest finish the team achieved that year being 3 fifth place finishes at Silverstone, Oulton Park and the debuting Croft circuit. This in turn saw Vauxhall finishing last in the Manufacturers' Championship, with Cleland and Warwick finishing a dreadful 12th and 14th respectively in the drivers, but even with the dreadful year they had, you could argue that 1997 was a transitional season for the British manufacturer, as in the years afterwards the team would make steady progress, with 1998 seeing the team pick up 3 wins during the year, 2 of which coming from Cleland, whilst the other would come from Warwick at Knockhill, which would turn out to be his only win in the BTCC, whilst 1999 would see the team progress a bit further, as although they would only take 1 win, courtesy of Yvan Müller, who replaced the retired Derek Warwick, winning at Brands Hatch Indy, the team were a lot more competitive, and were nearer to the front on a lot more occasions than what they were in 98. But 1999 would actually mark the end of an era for the team, as John Cleland would enter his final year in the series before retiring at the end of the season. But sad to say that he didn't get the send-off that he was hoping for, as he finished the year all the way down in 13th, whilst teammate Müller finished up in 6th. The turn of the millennium would see the team expand to a 3-car entry as a result of there being only 3 works manufacturer teams that year, and it would also mark the first year that Müller would be paired with Jason Plato, a man that he would be very familiar with in the next couple of years. The team, as expected, would progress even further compared to 99, and it initially looked like they could compete with Ford for the title, with Plato and Müller taking victories early on in the season, including one where Jason was forced to concede the win to Müller despite the fact that JP led the standings going into that race. But as the season went on, their pace compared to the Fords would start to dwindle, with the team only taking 2 more wins during the year, with them even falling behind Honda come the second half of the season. Whilst Müller and Plato were able to finish best of the rest outside the 3 Ford drivers, Honda was still able to pit them to second in the manufacturers, as a result of their other teammate Vincent Rademacher underperforming in the 3rd Vauxhall. The end of 2000 would bring to an end the Super Touring regulations in the BTCC, and with Ford and Honda pulling out after the season came to a close, Vauxhall had the perfect chance going into 2001 to completely obliterate the championship. And my word, would they do so. To comply with the new BTC touring regulations that were brought in, Vauxhall would switch from the Vectra, which they had used for 5 years, to the Astra Coupe, which had a similar design to the Vectra, albeit a bit chunkier and 2 doors less. With Persia returning to the championship with a 406 and the rest of the grid comprising of a couple of independents, with MG making their debut later on in the season, 888 Racing, the team that ran the Vauxhalls, decided to enter a second team in order to boost the grid numbers. This meant that there were 4 Vauxhalls on the grid, with 2 seats going to each team, with the Vauxhall Motorsport team retaining Yvan Müller and Jason Plato, whilst Team Egg, which was named after the insurance company that was sponsoring the team, would not have Vincent Rademacher in one of those seats as a result of him underperforming the previous year, and would instead have them filled by James Thompson, who returned to Vauxhall as a result of Honda pulling out, and the debuting Phil Bennett, who throughout the year would be known for the tussles that he would have with the returning Steve Soper, with their tussle at Croft being the most notable, where Bennett would end up getting a weekend ban for the next meeting, with his seat at Oulton Park being taken by future World Touring Car champion Andy Priaulx. Despite this little moment though, Vauxhall as expected would dominate the championship, with both teams nearly doing a clean sweep of victories throughout the year, with the only race they didn't win coming in race 1 of the finale at Brands Hatch Indy, where thanks to the race being called early due to torrential rain, it saw the MG of Anthony Reid take the manufacturer's first ever win in only its third ever meeting. But the season is well remembered for the fierce inter-team rivalry that happened at the Vauxhall Motorsport camp between Yvan Müller and Jason Plato, a rivalry which I have covered on this channel before, so go check it out if you are interested. In a rivalry which saw the pair taking lumps out of each other, it was in the end won by Jason Plato, who would grab his first BTCC title at the final race after teammate Yvan Müller was forced to retire under the safety car due to a fire that had broken out underneath his engine following multiple trips across the grass at McLaren Corner. Despite this achievement though, Jason would not be retained by the team for 2002, as due to his relationship with Yvan breaking down and with Yvan already having a contract with the team, Jason would find himself without a drive, with him taking part in a few rounds of the ASCAR series in 2002 before being signed up by Seat in 2003 in preparation for his return to the BTCC in 2004, which would coincide with Seat making their debut as well. As for 2002 though, the seat that Jason vacated would end up being taken by his good friend James Thompson, who would move over from the Team Egg side of the garage, whilst the team he vacated would end up having a new lineup, with Phil Bennett also leaving the team to join the new Proton team that made its debut the same year. The new lineup for Team Egg consisted of future champion Matt Neal, who returned to the series full time after only doing one meeting for Peugeot the previous year, whilst the second seat would be taken by Mel C's half brother Paul O'Neill, yes they are related, who competed in the production class the previous year, as this was during a time when the BTCC had 2 classes again in order to fill the grid numbers. The season would once again see Vauxhall dominating the championship, as whilst they wouldn't get a near clean sweep of victories like they did the previous year, they would still take a huge percentage of wins, with the manufacturer picking up 15 wins out of the 20 races that were ran that year, with the championship once again being contested between the 2 Vauxhall Motorsport drivers, with James Thompson being able to fill the role that Jason left behind. The pair would be on equal footing throughout the year, with them even coming together at the second visit of Brands Hatch Indy, which resulted in JT getting beached in the gravel. This culminated in a title showdown at the finale at Donington GP, with the pair once again making contact in race 1, in a race which saw Thompson take his 6th win of the season, whilst race 2 would see Müller retire early on in the race due to a suspension failure. And with Thompson leading the standings heading into race 2, it meant as a result, he walked away with his first ever BTCC title, finishing the race in 3rd and beating Müller to the title in the end by 20 points. For the second year running, Müller missed out on the title, and it was once again due to a retirement at the final race caused by a mechanical issue, and this made him even hungrier to try and finally win his first title in 2003. The year would see Triple Eight Racing revert back to just running one team now that more manufacturers and independents had entered the series, with the team opting to run a 3-car program, with the 3rd car being driven by Paul O'Neill, who moved over to the Vauxhall Motorsport team as a result of the second team closing its doors, whilst Matt Neal moved over to the manufacturer-backed Honda team, who made their return the previous year, being ran by Arena International Motorsport, a move which would eventually lead to Matt reuniting with his family-run Team Dynamic squad once they acquired the Hondas in 2004. The year would see Vauxhall again win the most races compared to the other manufacturers, with all 3 drivers picking up at least 1 win throughout the course of the year. But by this stage, their rivals had managed to catch them up a bit, with the amount of wins Vauxhall had being once again less compared to the previous years. But thanks to their consistency, they were still able to dominate the championship, with the title battle once again being between Müller and Thompson. JT would have the early advantage at the first meeting at Mondello Park, winning both races there, before Müller would go on a streak of 3 consecutive victories, with him picking up 3 more wins throughout the course of the year, whilst JT would pick up another win at Silverstone, but would struggle to see the top step of the podium until the final meeting at Alton Park. This drought of victories, combined with a horror meeting at the second visit to Brands Hatch Indy, would end up having an impact on his title aspirations, as heading into the final meeting, Thompson found himself 30 points behind teammate Müller, exactly 2 victories behind his French teammate, with only the bonus points keeping his slim hopes alive. Realistically, his chances of retaining his title was effectively over, and it would officially be confirmed in race 1, as despite taking victory, his first since Silverstone, Müller's 3rd place finish was enough for the Frenchman to finally grab his first BTCC title, making it 3 drivers' titles in a row for Vauxhall, with all 3 being won by a different driver. By the time race 2 came to a close, which saw Müller finish 2nd and Thompson retire thanks to a mechanical failure, Müller would end up winning the championship ahead of JT by a massive 34 points, underlying the difficult season that the Yorkshireman had. But undeterred, Thompson would try again in 2004, as he looked to try and win back the title that he lost from Müller. 2004 would see a big change to the series, as along with Seat making their debut, which in turn saw the introduction of S2000 cars being allowed to compete in the championship alongside the BTC Touring regs, the series would also see a format change, as gone was the 2-race format, which comprised of a mandatory pit stop in the second race, although it was both races for 2003, and in its place was a 3-race format, all of which being sprint races, which meant the removal of pit stops, which in turn saved costs. On top of this, the grids for races 2 and 3 would be determined by the results of the previous race, but with a twist, as the race 2 grid would see the top 10 from race 1 being reversed, whilst race 3 would just be the order the drivers finished in race 2. This, combined with the refined success ballast system that was brought in from the start of 2002, would make it a lot difficult for Vauxhall to have a stranglehold in all the races. And this would prove to be effective, as although all 3 cars were able to grab a victory, including Luke Hines who replaced the outgoing Paul O'Neill following his diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, which at the time suspended his racing licence, the team achieved a lot fewer victories than what they had accumulated in the previous 3 years. But even despite the other manufacturers taking victories from them, or independent teams in some cases like with West Surrey Racing and Team Dynamics, their strong consistency throughout the year allowed Müller and Thompson to still dominate the championship, even despite a brief challenge from the returning Jason Plato, who gave it a good go in his S2000 Seat Toledo as a result of him picking up more victories than both Müller and Thompson, with the inconsistent nature of his Seat preventing him from being a lot closer to Müller and JT. Müller and Thompson would grab 4 wins apiece heading into the finale, with JT once again having to wait a while before picking up his 4th win, but his consistency compared to Müller allowed him to stay in the fight this time around. Heading into the final meeting at Donington National, Thompson led the championship ahead of Müller by just 4 points, with the gap fluctuating in races 1 and 2, with Thompson, thanks to finishing 2nd, being able to up the gap to 13 points after race 1 as a result of Müller finishing a dismal 7th, whilst race 2 would swing in the other direction, with Müller this time finishing in 2nd, whilst Thompson would be in no man's land this time around, but to a lesser extent compared to Müller, with him finishing 5th instead of 7th. This meant that going into the final race, Thompson only led the championship by 6 points, meaning it was anyone's guess as to who would come out on top. Despite Müller showing strong pace, which in turn saw him take his 5th win of the season, it wasn't enough for him to win the title, as thanks to JT finishing in 3rd and also grabbing the fastest lap point, it meant that Thompson walked away with his 2nd BTCC title, with the fastest lap point being the only thing in the end that separated them, with the gap in the end being just 1 point. For JT, it was a massive relief that he was able to win back the title that he lost in 03, and it was also the perfect way for him to end his time in the BTCC, as he would end up walking away from the series at the end of the year, essentially leaving the series on top. Müller, on the other hand, would remain with the team for 2005, this time being joined by the Irish pairing of Colin Turkington and Gavin Smith, one being from Northern Ireland and the other being from the Republic of Ireland, in a season which would mark a new era for the team, as after 4 years with the Astra Coupe, the team would switch to the new Astra Sport hatch. But it would be during this year that Vauxhall's stranglehold of the BTCC would come to an end, as despite being in the title fight and also being able to retain the manufacturer's crown, Müller was unable to continue Vauxhall's streak of drivers' championships, as Matt Neal in the lightning quick Honda Integra would beat Müller to win his first BTCC title, beating the Frenchman in the end by 43 points. Müller, as a result, would end up leaving the championship at the end of 05 and would make the switch to the World Touring Car Championship with Seat, with him having a lot more success in the series than what he had in the BTCC. His seat at Vauxhall for 2006, on the other hand, would end up being taken by Fabrizio Giovanardi, who would finally make his long-awaited debut in the series, but the year would end up being a disaster, with the team only picking up 2 wins that year and being nowhere near the title fight. With how disastrous the year had been, the team ended up ditching the Astra Sport hatch at the end of the year and switched to the up-to-date version of the Vectra, something they considered doing for 2004 but ended up scrapping after an unsuccessful test at Albacete. The switch would end up proving to be successful, as despite a close fight with Jason Plato, the team would win back the championship in 2007 with Fabrizio Giovanardi and would retain the title in 2008 as well. 2009 would see them lose the championship to Colin Turkington after a close fight with him throughout the year, and it would end up being the final year that Vauxhall would provide manufacturer backing, as they would end up splitting with 888 Racing at the end of the year. The team would continue to run the Vectra for the next 2 years, with Fabrizio Giovanardi picking up 2 more wins in 2010 at Thruxton, but apart from that, it would lead to little success, with Fabrizio only contracted for 1 meeting in 2010, which would end up hampering the team's prospects of winning another title, whilst Andrew Jordan in another Vectra would get another win for the car at Snetterton with his family-ran Eurotech team. 888 Racing would end up securing a manufacturer deal with MG from 2012, with the Vectra being passed around by other teams for the next 2 years before it was officially retired at the end of 2013 following the switch to the NGTC regulations. Vauxhall would not return to the championship until 2017, when it would provide manufacturer backing to PowerMax Racing, with the team being able to pick up a few wins throughout the next 3 years, before the pandemic in 2020 would put an end to their partnership. Despite this though, PMR would continue to run the Astras until the middle of 2025, when due to a terrible fire that broke at PMR's base in Evesham, which destroyed everything inside including the NGTC Astras, it sadly meant as a result that it would be the last time to date that a Vauxhall would be seen on the BTCC grid, with PMR switching to Cupra Leons that had been donated by 2 other independent teams to complete the season. A tragic end for now for such an iconic manufacturer in the sport, as when you think of a manufacturer that you associate with the BTCC, you immediately think of Vauxhall, in the same way you associate Ferrari with Formula 1, which was the analogy that was used by ITV commentator at the time Ben Edwards, who referred to Vauxhall as the British Ferrari. And with their dominance in the early years of the 21st century, it's understandable why that analogy was first made, hence why I've used it in the title of this video. Thing is though, had Ford and Honda not pulled out after 2000, would Vauxhall still been as dominant, and would they have still won the title? Now, yes, Honda did return in 2002 with the Civic, but they were a year or 2 behind on development, so we can't really draw any conclusions on that. Plus, the team was run by Arena International Motorsport, not West Surrey Racing, who by this point had switched to the MG, which had only made its debut in the third to last meeting of 2001, so again, we can't really use them for any conclusions. It is an interesting thought, and I would love to get your opinions in the comments below. But one thing you can't deny is their dominance in the BTCC made them recognisable in the UK, which only helped with sales of their cars in UK showrooms. The Vauxhall dominance of the early 2000s, an historical moment in British motorsport.